Welcome to the Crit Stories. Today, we begin our deep dive into one of the most dramatic and shocking moments in modern history, the televised execution of Romania's dictator, Nicolae Ceaușescu. This event marked not just a violent end of a brutal regime, but also became a defining symbol of revolutionary justice, served publicly and broadcast live to millions. But to understand how this moment came to be, we first need to explore the rise of Ceaușescu himself, how he climbed the ranks, the political environment that shaped his rule, and how he went from being an unlikely reformer to one of the most feared dictators in Eastern Europe. Nicolae Ceaușescu was born in 1918 in the small village of Scornășesti in southern Romania. Coming from a modest peasant background, he became involved in communist activism at a young age. Throughout the 1930s and 1940s, Ceaușescu worked his way up through the Romanian Communist Party, a movement that was an underground and persecuted by the monarchy and later by fascist regimes. The post-World War II era drastically changed Romania's political landscape. Soviet troops occupied the country, and by 1947, the monarchy was abolished, and a communist regime was established under Soviet influence. Ceaușescu quickly positioned himself as a loyal party member and proved adept at navigating the treacherous waters of communist politics. In 1965, following the death of Gheorghe George, Ceaușescu was elected General Secretary of the Romanian Communist Party, effectively becoming the country's leader. At first, many believed he might steer Romania on a more independent and progressive course. Unlike other Eastern Bloc leaders, Ceaușescu pursued a somewhat independent foreign policy, even condemning the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968, which won him admiration both domestically and abroad. His early years in power showed some promise. Romania experienced economic growth, and Ceaușescu cultivated a cult of personality, positioning himself as a father of the Romanian people. He invested in large infrastructure projects, industrialization, and tried to modernize agriculture. But beneath the surface, cracks began to show. Ceaușescu's leadership style grew increasingly authoritarian. He centralized power around himself and his close circle, silencing dissent and encouraging a climate of fear. The notorious secret police force, known as the Securitate, expanded dramatically under his rule, spying on millions of citizens and crushing any opposition. Ceaușescu's paranoia deepened over the years. He surrounded himself with yes-men and built a personality cult that rivaled even that of Stalin. Portraits of him and his wife, Elena, who held significant political influence, were everywhere. Streets, schools, factories, and public buildings were adorned with their images. Economic policies also took a disastrous turn. In the 1980s, Ceaușescu embarked on an ambitious plan to pay off Romania's foreign debt as quickly as possible. To achieve this, he enforced drastic austerity measures that led to widespread shortages of food, electricity, and heating for the Romanian people. Life became a daily struggle for survival. One of his most infamous projects was the construction of the Palace of the Parliament in Bucharest, a massive and extravagant building that consumed enormous amounts of resources and manpower. This architectural monstrosity symbolized Ceaușescu's detachment from the realities faced by ordinary Romanians. His regime was marked by human rights abuses on a large scale, forced relocations, suppression of religious institutions, censorship, and imprisonment of political prisoners. Families lived in fear of being reported to the Securitate by neighbors or co-workers. Freedom of speech and assembly were non-existent. Despite these conditions, the regime maintained a facade of strength. Ceaușescu used propaganda and control of the media to project an image of prosperity and stability. Public demonstrations were forbidden, and the secret police kept close watch on any hint of unrest. The world outside began to change dramatically in the 1980s. The Soviet Union under Mikhail Gorbachev introduced policies of glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, encouraging reforms and greater freedoms. Many Eastern European countries experienced peaceful revolutions that toppled their communist regimes. Romania, however, remained rigid and isolated under Ceaușescu's rule. He refused to loosen his grip or allow reforms. The growing poverty and oppression set the stage for the explosive revolt that would come in December 1989. So, how did this isolated, paranoid dictator, ruling with an iron fist and a cult of personality, end up executed on live television just 24 years after taking power? What triggered the collapse of one of the most feared regimes in Europe? These are the questions we will explore in the coming segments. Stay with us as we uncover the revolution that shook Romania to its core and the unprecedented broadcast that captured justice, raw, immediate, and brutal, on screen. In our last segment, we explored the rise of Nicolae Ceaușescu and the grim reality of his rule. Now, we turn to the moment when decades of oppression ignited into a fiery revolution, the Romanian Revolution of December 1989. While many Eastern European countries experienced peaceful transitions away from communism in the late 1980s, Romania's path was far more violent and tumultuous. Understanding the roots of this uprising requires looking closely at the mounting grievances of the Romanian people and the political context that shaped the country's explosive reaction to Ceaușescu's regime. By the late 1980s, Romania was a nation on the brink. The harsh austerity measures Ceaușescu imposed to repay foreign debt had devastated the economy. Food was scarce. Energy shortages were frequent. Sometimes entire cities endured hours-long blackouts in freezing winters. Basic necessities were rationed. The government monitored even the smallest acts of dissent, and the brutal secret police remained a constant threat. Yet, despite the fear and deprivation, the Romanian people found ways to resist and express their dissatisfaction, albeit quietly. Small-scale protests and acts of defiance occurred, but they were quickly and violently suppressed. The spark that ignited the full-scale revolution came in mid-December 1989 in the western city of Timișoara. It began as a protest against the forced eviction of Hungarian Reformed church pastor Laszlo Tokes. His outspoken criticism of the regime's repression and religious persecution had made him a target. When authorities moved to remove him from his church, locals rallied in his defense. What started as a localized protest soon escalated. Citizens took to the streets, chanting slogans against the government and Ceaușescu's regime. The security forces responded with force, opening fire on demonstrators and killing several people. Instead of quelling the unrest, this brutal crackdown only fueled public anger and drew more people into the streets. News of the Timișoara uprising spread rapidly. Despite the government's tight grip on information, rumors of deaths and violent repression circulated, inspiring protests in other cities. The unrest became a nationwide movement demanding freedom, democracy, and the end of Ceaușescu's dictatorship. By December 21st, the situation had become critical. Ceaușescu, hoping to demonstrate control, organized a massive rally in Bucharest's Palace Square. He planned to deliver a televised speech condemning the protests and reaffirming his authority. But the event backfired spectacularly. The crowd, initially gathered under government pressure, began to boo and jeer at Ceaușescu. Shouts of "Down with Ceaușescu" echoed through the square, a shocking display of open defiance that was almost unprecedented in a country ruled by fear for decades. The dictator's speech faltered, his usual commanding presence shattered by the hostile reaction. The broadcast camera caught the stunned expression on his face as the crowd's anger grew louder. The scene was surreal, a leader losing control in front of his people and the world. As the protests intensified, Ceaușescu and his wife Elena fled the capital by helicopter, escaping to a military base outside Bucharest. This dramatic flight signaled the collapse of their regime. However, it was only the beginning of the turmoil to come. The power vacuum unleashed chaos. The army, initially loyal to Ceaușescu, began switching sides. Protesters took control of major cities. Civilians formed militias to protect themselves and fight against the remnants of the old regime. Amid confusion, rumors, and misinformation spread rapidly. Reports of violent clashes, shootings, and casualties circulated, adding to the tension. The revolution was both spontaneous and organized, driven by ordinary Romanians' desperation for change after years of suffering. The Ceaușescus were soon captured by the military. Nicolae and Elena were placed under arrest, and the new leaders of the revolution prepared to bring them to justice. But how would justice be served after decades of repression? Would the dictator face a fair trial, or would vengeance prevail? The Romanian Revolution of 1989 was a moment when the people's pent-up frustration exploded into open rebellion. It was a fight for freedom, dignity, and a new future. But it was also a chaotic, violent, and uncertain time, where hope and fear collided. In the next segment, we will explore the swift capture and trial of the Ceaușescus, a trial that shocked the world with its speed and severity, culminating in an unprecedented public execution. So far, we've traced the rise of Nicolae Ceaușescu and the explosive uprising that shattered his regime. Now, we arrive at the dramatic moment when Ceaușescu and his wife Elena were captured and put on trial, a process as swift and shocking as the revolution itself. After fleeing Bucharest by helicopter on December 22, 1989, Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu found themselves trapped at a military base outside the city. With the revolutionary forces gaining momentum, their options dwindled rapidly. What followed next was a harrowing sequence of events that would end the reign of one of Europe's most ruthless dictators. The couple was soon arrested by the new military leadership, which included officers sympathetic to the revolutionaries and eager to restore order. The Ceaușescus were taken into custody under heavy guard. Their fall from absolute power was staggering. From the heads of a feared state apparatus to prisoners within days. One of the most remarkable aspects of their capture was how quickly the new government moved to bring them to trial. The authorities feared that delays might allow the Ceaușescus to rally loyalists or escape. There was also immense public pressure to deliver justice swiftly for decades of oppression, torture, and economic misery. Thus, within just days of their arrest, a military tribunal was convened to try the Ceaușescus. The trial took place in a makeshift courtroom, a stark contrast to the grand halls the couple once ruled from. The proceedings were tense and hurried, reflecting the urgency and chaos of the revolutionary period. The charges against Nicolae and Elena were grave and numerous. They included genocide, undermining the national economy, abuse of power, and illegal gathering of wealth. The prosecution accused them of ordering violent crackdowns on demonstrators, running a brutal secret police state, and causing widespread suffering. The trial was swift and uncompromising. Reports indicate it lasted just a few hours, far from the lengthy, evidence-heavy proceedings typical of modern courts. The defense was minimal, with the Ceaușescus denied extensive legal representation. Whether the trial met international standards of fairness remains a subject of debate. Nevertheless, the trial was a spectacle, broadcast on Romanian television and watched by millions. For many citizens, it was their first unfiltered glimpse of the once untouchable dictator, now vulnerable and facing the consequences of his rule. Nicolae Ceaușescu, known for his arrogance and domineering presence, appeared frail and defeated. Elena, equally formidable during their reign, was also visibly shaken. Both maintained their innocence and attempted to justify their actions as necessary for the country's survival. Despite their pleas, the tribunal swiftly found them guilty on all counts. The verdict was clear and uncompromising. Both were sentenced to death by firing squad. The sentencing shocked some observers abroad who had hoped for a more measured legal process. However, for many Romanians, the rapid trial and sentence were seen as a form of immediate justice, a powerful message that the era of dictatorship was over. The public execution was scheduled for the very same day, December 25, 1989. This decision was unprecedented. Few heads of state in modern history had been executed so publicly and swiftly after a revolution. As the day approached, tension in Romania was palpable. The nation was still reeling from weeks of violent upheaval, and the execution represented a grim closure for many who had suffered under Ceaușescu's regime. In the next segment, we will delve into the execution itself, the atmosphere, the events leading up to it, and the impact of broadcasting such a momentous act live on national television. In the previous segment, we covered the rapid capture and trial of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu, culminating in their death sentence. Now, we arrive at the climax of this extraordinary chapter in history. The execution itself, broadcast live on Romanian television. December 25, 1989, remains one of the most dramatic dates in modern European history. On this day, the former dictator and his wife were led out to face the firing squad, their final moments captured by cameras and transmitted to millions of viewers. A spectacle both harrowing and symbolic. The decision to execute the Ceaușescus so swiftly and publicly was influenced by many factors. The new revolutionary government, led by Ion Iliescu and other former communists who had switched allegiances, wanted to demonstrate decisively that the old regime was over. There was also a powerful desire to satisfy a population that had endured decades of oppression and misery. It's important to note that the execution was not just a matter of punishment, but also a performance of justice on screen, a catharsis for a nation, and a stark warning to any lingering supporters of the dictatorship. The Ceaușescus were kept under guard in a military compound just outside Bucharest, where the trial and execution were conducted. The environment was tense, chaotic, and heavily guarded to prevent any rescue attempts or riots. Eyewitness accounts describe Nicolae as defiant and cold even in his final moments, while Elena was visibly shaken and pleading. The couple was reportedly offered some last moments to compose themselves, but the atmosphere was grim and rushed. The execution was carried out by a small military firing squad. Details vary, but it's generally accepted that Nicolae was the first to be shot, followed immediately by Elena. Both died quickly, ending a reign marked by cruelty and oppression. What set this execution apart, however, was its live broadcast on Romanian television. For the first time in history, a head of state's death sentence and execution were transmitted directly into living rooms across the country. The broadcast shocked the world. While some viewed it as a raw and unfiltered act of justice, others questioned the ethics of televising such a violent and personal moment. The graphic nature of the execution left many viewers stunned, and the images have since become emblematic of Romania's turbulent transition. For Romanians, seeing the dictator fall on live TV was a powerful moment, a symbol of liberation and an end to decades of fear. It allowed the public to witness justice being served in real time, giving a sense of closure after years of silence and oppression. However, the broadcast also raised important questions. Was this public execution an act of justice or revenge? Did it respect the rule of law? Or did it undermine the ideals the revolution sought to establish? Internationally, reactions were mixed. Some Western governments expressed concern over the lack of a fair trial and the spectacle of a televised execution. Human rights organizations criticized the summary nature of the trial and the denial of due process. Nevertheless, the televised execution became a defining moment of the Romanian Revolution, a brutal and uncompromising conclusion to one of Europe's last communist dictatorships. In the next segment, we will examine the immediate aftermath of the execution, the political and social changes that followed, and how Romania began to rebuild from the ruins of its past. We've just witnessed the unprecedented televised execution of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu, a moment that shocked the world and marked the brutal end of a dictatorship. Now, in this segment, we explore what happened next, the immediate aftermath of the execution, and the challenges Romania faced as it began to rebuild itself. The fall of the Ceaușescu regime was a watershed moment. It ended over 4 decades of oppressive communist rule and ushered in a new era for Romania. But this transition was far from smooth. The country was deeply scarred, economically, politically, and socially, and the execution, though symbolic, was just the beginning of a long road to recovery. Immediately following the Ceaușescu's execution on December 25, 1989, the new government sought to establish control and stabilize the nation. Ion Iliescu and the National Salvation Front, NSF, a coalition of former communist officials and dissidents, emerged as a primary political force. While the revolution was driven by a broad coalition of citizens, workers, students, and intellectuals demanding freedom, the NSF quickly consolidated power, raising questions about how much change would truly occur beneath the surface. One of the key challenges was addressing the deep economic crisis. Years of austerity had left the population impoverished, infrastructure deteriorating, and industries struggling. Reform was essential but complicated by the lack of experience with market economies and the entrenched interests of former regime loyalists. Political reform also faced obstacles. Although the dictatorship was over, many of the old power structures remained intact. The secret police, Securitate, was officially dismantled, but its influence lingered. Former officials retained positions in government and business, complicating efforts to root out corruption and establish transparency. Socially, Romanians had to confront the trauma of decades of oppression and fear. Families mourned lost loved ones, Citizens grappled with distrust, and society was polarized between those eager for rapid change and those fearing instability. Internationally, Romania sought to reestablish its position. The fall of communism opened the door for relations with Western Europe and the United States, leading eventually to Romania's integration into NATO and the European Union in the following decades. The televised execution of the Ceaușescus left a lasting impression. For many, it symbolized that justice could be swift and absolute, especially after years of impunity. Yet, others saw it as a reminder of how quickly the rule of law could be compromised during times of upheaval. Over time, Romania embarked on legal and political reforms, slowly building democratic institutions and a market economy. The legacy of the revolution and the dramatic final act of the Ceaușescus remain deeply etched in the nation's collective memory. The story of Romania's televised execution is more than a historical curiosity. It's a powerful reminder of the cost of tyranny, the complexities of revolution, and the human desire for justice and dignity. In the next segment, we'll explore how the media's role in broadcasting the trial and execution influenced perceptions of justice and revolution in Romania and beyond. We have journeyed to the rise and fall of Nicolae Ceaușescu, the rapid trial, the dramatic execution, and the aftermath that shaped Romania's future. Now, let's explore a crucial element that made this story unique: the role of the media, especially television, in broadcasting justice and influencing how history was perceived. The televised execution of the Ceaușescus was not just a historical event. It was a media spectacle unprecedented in its immediacy and rawness. For the first time, millions of Romanians witnessed their former leaders fall live, a shockwave that rippled throughout society. Media during the communist era in Romania was strictly controlled by the state. Under Ceaușescu's rule, censorship was pervasive. Television, radio, and newspapers served as propaganda tools, reinforcing the dictator's image and suppressing dissent. The Romanian people were starved for truthful news, making the live broadcast of the trial and execution all the more impactful. When the revolution erupted, control over the media became one of the first priorities for the insurgents. Seizing the state television station allowed them to communicate directly with the public, rally support, and frame the narrative of change. Broadcasting the trial and execution of the Ceaușescus was a bold move. It served multiple purposes: demonstrating the fall of a dictator, showing the couple's vulnerability on screen shattered the myth of their invincibility, delivering catharsis. For a population that had suffered decades of fear and repression, seeing justice served was deeply emotional and symbolic, legitimizing the new government. The revolutionary leaders used the broadcast to affirm their authority and reassure the public that order was being restored. However, the decision to air such graphic content sparked ethical debates. Some argued it was necessary transparency, showing the brutal truth without sugarcoating. Others believed it was voyeuristic and sensational, risking desensitization or glorification of violence. International media covered the broadcast extensively, with mixed reactions. Some praised Romania's openness during a historic transition, while others lamented the lack of a fair trial and the potential undermining of judicial norms. In the broader context, Romania's televised execution marked a turning point in how media could influence politics and public perception. It foreshadowed the future role of live broadcasts in documenting political upheavals worldwide. The impact on Romanian society was profound. The broadcast allowed citizens to feel part of the revolutionary moment, witnessing the consequences of tyranny firsthand. But it also raised questions about the limits of media exposure and the responsibility of broadcasters in times of crisis. In the years that followed, Romanian media evolved dramatically. From a mouthpiece of dictatorship, it gradually transformed into a platform for free expression, investigative journalism, and public debate. The legacy of those early broadcasts remains a key chapter in this journey. In the next segment, we will examine the international reactions to the Romanian Revolution and the execution, how the world responded to this dramatic end, and what it meant for the global fight against communism. As we explore the fall of Nicolae Ceaușescu and the shocking televised execution that followed, it's essential to understand how the world reacted. The Romanian Revolution of 1989 unfolded at a time when the Cold War was nearing its end, and the global community watched closely as communist regimes in Eastern Europe collapsed one by one. The sudden and violent overthrow of the Ceaușescu regime, punctuated by the unprecedented live broadcast of his trial and execution, sent shockwaves far beyond Romania's borders. Many Western nations express a mixture of relief and caution. For decades, Ceaușescu had been one of the most brutal and isolated leaders in the Eastern Bloc. His regime was marked by severe repression, economic mismanagement, and a notorious secret police apparatus. When news broke that he had been captured, tried, and executed on live television, the initial reaction was disbelief and then hope. Hope that Romania, like its neighbors Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia, would transition peacefully toward democracy and open markets. Western leaders praised the Romanian people's courage in rising up against tyranny. They saw the revolution as a critical blow against communism and a hopeful sign that authoritarian regimes were losing their grip on Eastern Europe. However, many also voiced concerns over the rapidity and severity of the events. The summary trial and execution raised questions about due process and human rights. Some worried that Romania's transition might be marred by violence and instability, rather than the peaceful reforms seen elsewhere. Human rights organizations highlighted the lack of a fair trial for the Ceaușescus, pointing out that the executions, though popular domestically, set a troubling precedent for justice conducted without thorough legal safeguards. Meanwhile, communist regimes elsewhere watched the Romanian uprising with alarm. The violent overthrow and the fate of the Ceaușescus served as a grim warning. Some regimes doubled down on repression to avoid similar uprisings, while others began to reconsider their policies in the face of growing unrest. The Soviet Union, under Mikhail Gorbachev, took a notably restrained stance. Gorbachev had been promoting policies of glasnost openness and perestroika restructuring, and was wary of direct intervention. He signaled a shift from past practices where the USSR might have sent troops to suppress such revolutions. The world media extensively covered the revolution and execution. Images and footage of Ceaușescu's downfall became iconic, symbols of the collapse of an era. Documentaries, news reports, and analyses debated the implications for justice, revolution, and the future of Eastern Europe. In academic and political circles, Romania's revolution became a case study in rapid regime change and the complexities of transitional justice. Scholars examine the balance between delivering swift justice and ensuring legal standards, a tension that played out vividly in Romania's televised trial. In the years following the revolution, Romania gradually integrated into Western institutions, joining NATO in 2004 and the European Union in 2007. The international community played a vital role in supporting Romania's political and economic reforms. Romania's experience also influenced global thinking on how revolutions are reported and perceived. The live broadcast of such a dramatic political event underscored the power of media to shape narratives and mobilize public opinion. As we move to the next segment, we'll focus on the legacy of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu, how Romania remembers them today, and how their story continues to influence the country's collective memory. We've traced the fall of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu, their shocking televised execution, and the global reactions that followed. Now, we delve into their lasting legacy, how Romania remembers its last communist rulers, and the shadow they continue to cast over the country's history and identity. Nicolae Ceaușescu's rule from 1965 to 1989 left deep scars on Romania. His early years as leader showed some promise. He initially pursued a more independent foreign policy, at times opposing Soviet domination, which earned him a degree of popularity both domestically and internationally. However, over time, his regime grew increasingly repressive, dictatorial, and out of touch with the needs of the Romanian people. Under Ceaușescu's leadership, Romania endured severe economic hardships. His policies prioritized repaying foreign debt, often at the expense of basic living standards. Food shortages, energy rationing, and harsh austerity measures became daily realities. The infamous personality cult around Ceaușescu and his wife Elena elevated them above criticism, while dissent was ruthlessly suppressed. Elena Ceaușescu, once a chemist by training, wielded significant political power as well, becoming deputy prime minister and heavily involved in party affairs. She was widely despised for her arrogance and perceived corruption. Today, the Ceaușescus are remembered primarily as symbols of oppression and excess. Their regime is often described as one of the most brutal and isolated in Eastern Europe's communist history. Romanian society continues to grapple with this legacy. For many, the Ceaușescus embody the suffering and deprivation of a lost generation. The memories of secret police surveillance, political imprisonments, and everyday fear remain vivid in the collective consciousness. At the same time, Romania's post-revolutionary political landscape has been shaped by the need to confront and come to terms with this past. The process of lustration, removing former regime officials from public office, was uneven and controversial. Many former communists retained influence, complicating efforts to fully reckon with the dictatorship's crimes. Museums, memorials, and educational programs have sought to preserve the memory of the revolution and the human cost of Ceaușescu's rule. Sites like the former secret police headquarters in Bucharest have been transformed into museums that document abuses and educate future generations. Public opinion about the Ceaușescus varies. While most Romanians condemn their rule, a small minority views Nicolae as a strong leader who maintained Romania's sovereignty during the Cold War. This nostalgia reflects broader challenges in post-communist societies, where economic difficulties and political corruption sometimes fuel longing for the past. The legacy of the televised execution also persists. It remains a powerful symbol of justice served, yet also a reminder of the harsh realities of revolution and the complexities of legal and moral accountability. Romania's journey since 1989 has been one of transformation, from dictatorship to democracy, from isolation to integration with Europe and the world. But the shadow of the Ceaușescus and the trauma of their rule continue to inform the country's political culture and collective memory. In our next segment, we'll explore how Romania's experience fits into the broader story of the collapse of communism across Eastern Europe, and what lessons can be drawn from this dramatic chapter in history. As we near the conclusion of our deep dive into Romania's dramatic revolution and the televised execution of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu, it's vital to place these events in the broader context of the collapse of communism across Eastern Europe in 1989. The year 1989 is often called the Year of Revolutions, for good reason. Across the region, a series of popular uprisings, political shifts, and regime changes swept away decades of Soviet-backed communist rule. From Poland to East Germany, Czechoslovakia to Hungary, people demanded freedom, democracy, and economic reform. Romania's revolution was unique in several ways. Unlike the largely peaceful transition seen in countries like Poland's Solidarity Movement or Czechoslovakia's Velvet Revolution, Romania's change was violent, rapid, and ended with the execution of its dictator on live television. This difference stemmed from Ceaușescu's stubborn refusal to yield power and the regime's willingness to use lethal force against protesters. The ensuing chaos led to a bloody conflict that marked Romania's revolution as the most violent in the region. Despite this, Romania's uprising shared common roots with other Eastern European revolts. Widespread dissatisfaction with economic hardship, lack of political freedom, and the influence of reformist ideas spreading from the West and within the Soviet Union itself. Throughout 1989, the Soviet Union under Mikhail Gorbachev adopted a policy of non-intervention in the affairs of Eastern Bloc countries, breaking from past precedents where Moscow would send troops to suppress revolutions. This allowed movements in countries like Poland, Hungary, and East Germany to succeed largely without Soviet military interference. Romania's violent revolution thus stood out starkly, signaling both the depth of Ceaușescu's repression and the population's desperation for change. The fall of the Berlin Wall in November 1989 symbolized the collapse of the Iron Curtain and was soon followed by the dismantling of communist regimes throughout the region, including Romania. However, the legacy of Romania's revolution and televised execution continue to spark debates about justice, accountability, and the process of political transformation. While some countries pursued gradual reforms and negotiated transitions to democracy, Romania's swift and brutal overthrow highlighted the risks and costs of violent revolution. The Romania example served as a cautionary tale as well as inspiration, a testament to the power of popular will, but also a reminder of the fragility of justice and the dangers of extrajudicial actions. In the years that followed, Romania worked to align itself politically and economically with Western Europe. It joined NATO and the European Union, embracing democratic principles and market reforms, even as it continued to confront its difficult past. Romania's experience contributed to the broader understanding of post-communist transitions, influencing international policy and academic research on democratization, transitional justice, and media's role in political change. In our final segment, we'll reflect on the enduring lessons from Romania's revolution and televised execution, lessons about justice, media, and the price of freedom. We've arrived at the final segment of our journey through Romania's revolution, the televised execution of Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu, and the far-reaching impacts of these historic events. Now, let's reflect on the enduring lessons this story offers about justice, media, and the profound cost of freedom. The Romanian Revolution was a defining moment, not only for the country, but for the world. It starkly illustrated how a population's demand for change can topple even the most entrenched dictatorships. Yet, it also revealed the complexities and challenges inherent in the pursuit of justice during times of upheaval. Justice on screen, as Romania's televised trial and execution have been called, was dramatic and raw. For many Romanians, seeing the dictator held accountable in real time was cathartic, a collective reckoning with years of repression, suffering, and fear. The broadcast symbolized the collapse of a regime that had operated with impunity for decades. However, the swift and summary nature of the trial raised critical questions about the rule of law. Was justice truly served when due process was so rapidly bypassed? Did the televised execution risk reducing justice to spectacle? These questions continue to resonate today. Romania's experience teaches us that in revolutionary moments, the desire for swift justice can clash with legal norms and human rights principles. Striking the right balance between accountability and fairness remains a key challenge in transitional societies. The role of media in Romania's revolution was equally transformative. The live broadcast brought history into people's living rooms, making the fall of the dictatorship immediate and tangible. The power of television to inform, mobilize, and influence public sentiment was vividly demonstrated. Yet, the media's role also invites reflection on ethics and responsibility. Broadcasting such a graphic and politically charged event sparked debates about sensationalism, privacy, and the potential impact on viewers. It showed that while media can be a force for transparency and empowerment, it also carries the burden of handling sensitive events with care. On a broader scale, Romania's revolution and its media coverage exemplify how communication technology shapes political change. In the modern era, where live streaming and instant information dominate, the lessons from 1989 are more relevant than ever. Perhaps most poignantly, the Romanian story reminds us of the price of freedom. The revolution was costly. Over 1,000 lives lost in clashes, families torn apart, and nations scarred by years of oppression. Yet, from this turmoil emerged a new Romania, a country striving to rebuild democracy, embrace human rights, and integrate with the international community. The journey has been neither easy nor complete, but the courage of those who stood up against tyranny continues to inspire. As we look back, Romania's televised execution of its dictator remains a powerful symbol of the fall of authoritarianism, the complexities of justice, and the transformative power of media. Thank you for joining me on this detailed exploration of justice on screen, Romania's televised execution. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe, and hit the bell for more crit stories exploring history's most gripping tales. What other historical events or revolutions would you like to see covered? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious and keep seeking the stories that shape our world.